What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback podcast. I'm going to be riding solo today. Well, kind of. I have my daughter strapped to my chest, and we are going to hope she stays asleep. I am not sure if anyone joining me visually can see these eyes flutter. Hopefully, they stay shut. She was asleep before I started doing this, but I know I'm not going to have a lot of time later in the day or throughout the coming weeks. So I figured I'd just try to get this done and hope she can stay asleep through my babbling. Nonetheless, I am doing a little bit of cleanup today on the previous episode. That previous episode was part two of the Wake Forest Player Development Seminar Review with Josh Hedgeka. And really peeling back the layers even more, I'm going to specifically talk about a few additional things from the Nextbase presentation. Or Nextbase is a player development outfit in Tokyo, Japan, one of the most forward-thinking and biomechanically driven development centers that seems to exist on the planet, not just in Japan, but on the planet. Their big focuses are on biomechanical efficiency and what they deem as micro movements when it comes to their player development approach. Josh and I go into this in depth on the previous episode, but there are particular pieces that Josh had mentioned in his takeaways from the presentation that I did not sufficiently address in our communication with so much we had to get through. So this episode today is going to be specifically dedicated to addressing those few points that I feel I kind of left out in the ether and didn't give my proper take on, especially given my position with FlexPro Grip. Hopefully I've set the stage all right. Given that I'm mentioning FlexPro Grip, I'm sure you can begin to guess that this is going to have something to do with the forearm flexors, elbow health, and pitcher longevity and performance. Also, given the context of the podcast, if that's what you guessed, you'd be absolutely correct. Backpedaling a little bit and offering a quick review of what Nextbase has discovered and claimed. I hesitate to say discovered, but what they've claimed based on their internal data and their motion capture. They have uncovered, quote unquote, what they refer to as a ghost torque or a second peak valgus load that is occurring on the medial elbow. However, this load is occurring at the moment of or immediately post ball release. Traditionally, in all biomechanical assessments, we have come to accept as an industry that the moment of maximum external rotation or peak layback is the moment of highest stress or peak valgus load on the medial elbow. Ultimately, the danger point per se of the UCL. That is where these medial elbow injuries occur, or at least prior to Nextbase presenting this information, where we thought they occurred, or we 100% believe they occurred as an industry. Hedgeka quickly mentioned why Nextbase believes this second peak torque is occurring. They mention the extreme rapid flexion of the wrist and fingers at the moment of ball release. That is accepted, that is a natural action. I would argue it's not necessarily a controlled action by the player, by the individual. I think it's more passive in the sense of the way that we transfer energy. Naturally, as we apply force through that ball, the wrist and fingers are going to flex. So I don't think guys are rapidly, granted, I'm not pitching at a high level, nor did I. But I would argue guys aren't actively trying to really flex into ball release or snap that wrist down into ball release. But nonetheless, that motion is occurring. And I believe it is inarguable that that would stress the flexors. All the data would show, and what we do on FlexPro Grip would support that a flexion action of the wrist and fingers would stress the flexor muscles. To me, that's a simple A plus B equals C. However, with the argument from Nextbase or the presentation from Nextbase stating that this intense rapid flexion of the wrist and fingers, there is a valgus load at the medial elbow associated with the action. Now, that to me doesn't intuitively make sense, seeing how the flexion of the wrist and fingers is driven by the flexor mass, specifically the FDP and FDS, depending on what joint we're looking at. There are some other muscles that support wrist flexion, but if we're looking specifically at finger flexion, it's going to be the FDP and FDS, so the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor digitorum superficialis. Regardless, if we're talking flexion, that is our pulling down of the fingers. So like shooting a basketball, pulling the fingers into the palm. I'm trying to think of doing a simple wrist curling action or knocking on a door. That is flexion of the wrist and fingers. There is no elbow valgus load associated with those actions. And that's part of why FlexPro Grip is designed the way it's designed, so we can implement it early and often in the rehab process to avoid valgus loading. So if finger flexion and wrist flexion exist without stress on the UCL or without valgus load on the medial elbow in exercise physiology setting, I'm confused to how in the pitching setting, wrist and finger flexion would then create an elbow valgus load. I'm not here to say Nextbase is wrong in what they're claiming. What I am doing at this moment is stating where the numbers are not adding up from my side and from what we know currently as an industry. So that would be just one claim I would want significantly more research on to figure out how a second peak torque is being created that is being claimed a valgus load on the medial elbow when the action that they are saying causes this valgus stress does not cause valgus load on the medial elbow at any point in the exercise physiology world. On the other hand, if the claim was flexor injuries are commonly occurring at the moment of release, I think there could be some sort of argument there, whether it's the intense eccentric stress of trying to hold supination through release, the intense movement of supination to pronation, or if a pitcher is actively trying to apply greater force with one finger than the other, or even just trying to incite greater spin by really actively trying to pull down on the ball. I guess you could make an argument that those things are resulting in increased stress on the flexor mass, specifically the FDP and FDS. And then if we're talking pronation and supination, likely the pronator teres, there could be increased rates of flexor pronator mass injuries, without a doubt. I cannot argue that. In fact, I would even support that based on the criteria that I presented. However, flexor injuries and what causes these flexor injuries is not going to necessarily be the same mechanisms that are going to cause the UCL injury. The UCL injury is going to be caused by the valgus instability or that valgus load on the medial elbow that the whole system cannot handle. Now, if we want to keep connecting dots and the flexor mass is fatigued and can no longer do its job, the UCL is going to be predisposed to taking on more stress or more torque, ultimately putting the elbow in a more risky position. Enter FlexPro Grip, and we can prevent that from happening. But I just felt like that was very much worth addressing and kind of the multiple sides of it. Hopefully I didn't muddy the waters there with my explanation. It is a little bit difficult to just talk to a computer screen and try to get all of that out, but it's an opinion and I tried my best. Definitely happy to continue this discussion. And I guess for the masses, it's worth saying we connected with Nextbase at the after hours kind of celebration get together at the Wake Forest Player Development Seminar. We took down everybody's contact information, and as a whole, we are excited to kind of explore this topic more. We're certainly open to working with them and better understanding their approach and how they are addressing this ghost torque, as they called it. And if this ghost torque really does exist, how we can then address it from a training perspective, if anything else or anything different really needs to be done. As Josh and I mentioned on our episode the other day, our current hunch is this ghost torque is occurring because of the skin movement associated with throwing a ball really hard. The markers that are being used in a mocap, a markered mocap, they're stuck to the skin. And the skin is not entirely adhered to the underlying soft tissue. Thus, when we throw, there's going to be some sort of noise, as Josh outlined. There's always going to be noise associated with a biomechanical assessment. Now, marker-based mocap is probably going to have more noise from the movement of those nodes or of those markers. So hopefully with some of what Driveline is trying to do, or others who have markerless mocap systems, hopefully this is something that they can look into and uncover a bit more. But right now, our hunch is the skin is moving drastically at the moment of ball release, resulting in a bit of noise that pops up as valgus load on the medial elbow. I definitely encourage everyone, again, to go back to the previous episode, find this Nextbase section, and listen to Josh explain that a little bit more for the way they discuss this internally with the folks at Driveline. Now we're going to move on to part 2 of the cleanup. It is still from the same Nextbase presentation, and this is I guess another piece that FlexPro Grip is very directly tied to is a training ball that Nextbase presented from Mizuno. Me talking about this is probably going to get a few people excited, but Mizuno, I guess, has come out with a ball, as Josh mentioned, with a lower moment of inertia. Basically, what that means is less force is required to be transferred into the ball to generate the same amount of spin that a baseball would normally be thrown with. Thus, if you throw it at whatever, let's say 90 miles per hour and 2,000 RPMs, like a normal baseball, 90 miles per hour, 2,000 RPMs. If you put the same amount of force into that baseball, it's still thrown at 90 miles per hour. I'm going to butcher these percentages, and I don't know for a fact what this would turn out to be, but let's say now the average is the same 90 mile per hour fastball, but a 2,100 RPM fastball. Hopefully that paints the picture a little bit of what this ball is supposed to do, or I guess what moment of inertia is and how it impacts ball flight. Now, Nextbase is claiming a couple of things with this ball. They are claiming that because the ball has a lower moment of inertia and it can enable athletes to get comfortable putting more force into the ball and generating more spin, it may offer a training stimulus that can address either muscle tendon unit stiffness or neural stiffness. They did not say whether it was muscle tendon unit stiffness or neural stiffness. I would have to believe from what they are trying to present, this would be a neural or neuromuscular stiffness thing, given this is kind of a rate of force development principle, not as much a fatigue resistance principle. However, this is me putting my words onto their presentation, not them sharing their direct findings. Where this matters is, again, connecting back to the ghost torque at the moment of release. Nextbase claims that these injuries may be occurring because athletes, particularly pitchers, don't have the proper stiffness in the fingers and wrist or in the flexors. Thus, they are exposed to a potential risk. Again, they didn't mention the FDP and FDS. They didn't mention neural versus muscle tendon unit, but this is right up the alley of FlexPro Grip. From what we know, throwing a ball of any kind is not going to change the mechanical properties of a muscle tendon unit. Throwing a ball can act as a potentiation effect, much as throwing a med ball or swinging a lighter bat or a heavier bat or doing overcoming isometrics, as any sort of preparation for your next activity. Post-activation potentiation has been used throughout exercise physiology. It is extremely well researched and is a tremendous tool to get athletes prepared for their upcoming event, exercise, bout, what have you. In my mind, they just created a new tool with this ball, as in Mizuno created a new tool with this ball to have a little bit of a potentiating effect for imparting spin. Kyle Bodie at Driveline would say athletes who throw plyo balls and have thrown them routinely increase their spin rates. There are aspects of that, although not researched clinically, make a ton of sense. The ball is softer, so athletes naturally grip it harder. Because of the sand or whatever the weight is within the plyo ball, it's going to move around. So the moment of inertia changes slightly. Thus, there is an increased impulse or time under tension associated with throwing a plyo ball, no matter what the weight is. Because that weight within the ball is moving around, there is a different loading mechanism that if we expose ourselves to that stimulus long enough, we're probably going to either get used to applying more force, more countering force with the flexors back into that ball, or we are just going to get comfortable pulling down harder to get the ball to go the direction that we want it to go. The third and kind of out there, but definitely worth addressing variable of change that comes with throwing plyo balls is because of the weight and because of the short distance of the target in front of most athletes who are throwing plyo balls, they tend to cut the ball. And if we cut the ball, spin rates are going to go up. We have to address that, although I really don't like stressing that point here because I think it's just convoluting the argument. It is not important for what we're addressing. However, throwing a plyo ball and accounting for spin efficiency, or I guess holding spin efficiency constant, and then comparing that to this lower moment of inertia baseball created by Mizuno, I don't understand how those things are that different. It really sounds to me like this is just a fun new tool that guys can use to prep for a game. Maybe it's a better feel than throwing a plyo ball for some individuals because it is made with leather or some sort of composite leather, so they can better translate it to a game feel. Nonetheless, it all comes back to a potentiating effect. There's not going to be any long-lasting change that comes to the mechanical properties of the muscle tendon units or the neural drivers that ultimately apply this increased rate of force development of the fingers into the ball. Where those changes come is from training, and not just training here and there, but sustained training. Stiffness of the muscle tendon units is well researched to show that it takes 8 to 12 weeks of somewhere between 2 to 4 bouts of training per week. We can get into the details, or you can reach out directly if you want to understand the details further of how much volume, how much time under tension we need to create these mechanical changes, as I said, or the actual changes to the Young's modulus. But we also need significant loading. We need those muscle tendon units ideally to be activated at 70% of an individual's maximum voluntary contraction. So 70% or greater of their 1 rep max. If that's the case, and we need time under tension associated with it, throwing a baseball of any kind, throwing a ball of any kind is not going to get us that stimulus. Now, on the neural side, there's no question we can increase stiffness through plyometric and ballistic movements. You think about this from a sprinting perspective or from a jumping perspective. Pogos, repeat effort jumps, things like that require Achilles stiffness or quick contractions of the Achilles are commonly programmed and well vetted. taking this to the baseball world, I don't know if throwing a baseball is going to provide that, seeing how throwing a baseball is a one-time effort thing. Then you repeat it 20 seconds later, roughly. But I would think we need to train more directly with the finger flexors to apply force more rapidly, which is why we do the rate of force development training on FlexPro Grip. Someone please reach out and tell me if you think I'm wrong or you want to go deeper in the weeds on this. I really just wanted to get my thoughts out there. And it's not to poo-poo any of Nextbase's research or poo-poo anything that's going on with this Mizuno lower moment of inertia ball. With a very science-driven mind, I struggle to grasp any claims that don't have significant data behind them. That isn't to say I don't get excited by them. All of this excites me tremendously because if all these things are true, it bucks the system. It changes the way that we need to look at things in the baseball world. It changes development. It changes rehab. It changes everything. To be fair, that's what we kind of are going through with FlexPro Grip. It's been a long road to get here, but we are certainly on that road of changing baseball and the way it's trained, developed, rehabbed, etc. It seems like Nextbase could be on that path. Are they? I'm not sure, but I'm definitely excited to dig deeper on all these topics, continue the discussions, and read whatever comes my way. It's not like we're going to be the ones that prove them right or wrong. There's going to be a lot of people that read this stuff, get excited about it, and I guess continue to dig deeper. You guys heard Josh. He said the crew at Driveline is going to try to dig into all this and run a bunch of internal studies. Hopefully, they can uncover something and move us forward. Nonetheless, I appreciate you guys joining me for this long babbling rant today. Hopefully, it came out cleanly. I guess I'll find out when I go through the editing process. So, fingers crossed. But as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys going on this journey with us. We should be back to our regularly scheduled content with Denton Sagerman on our next episode. So please mark your calendars for that one. It's going to be a great one. We definitely get pretty nerdy, but there's a lot of takeaways there. So I'm excited for it. Hopefully you guys are too. And as always, thanks for laying back with us.